Hey, what is going on? It is Crypto Bobby. Hope you are having a great day, great night, wherever you're watching or listening in from. And today, I want to talk about whether or not we are, as an industry, somewhat losing the original spirit, the original ethos of cryptocurrency in general. And there's a couple different things that have happened over the past few days that I think are worth discussing and talking about whether or not that, as this industry changes and evolves, are we creating like a real new industry, or are we simply taking the original kind of framework and the original banking system and everything like that and basically just wrapping it in a new technology wrapper? And I think it's a discussion worth having, and there's probably not a right or wrong answer. And I want to bring up both sides of the discussion. I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, but I do think it's something worth considering and kind of drawing your own opinion on as well. And apologies for the lack of content the past few days. Was on a little mini vacation out in Jamaica, which was awesome and beautiful, by the way. But dropping this video today, and also will be on YouTube Live this evening. It is October 24th. We'll be shooting a YouTube Live tonight at 8 p.m. Crypto Happy Hour. So if you'd like to join for that, I'll set the reminder on YouTube, but would love to see you there. Grab a beer, say what's up, and we'll have a good time. So let's get into the discussion today. So a couple different topics so far that I think are worth talking about, and Coinbase specifically dropped a ton of news in the past few days. Two things in particular: they were approved to offer custody services in New York, which is big news, and they also Coinbase added their first ever stablecoin tied to the US dollar. It's actually the USDC, which is part of Circle Center. So there were two big pieces of news, and then the third piece of news, non-Coinbase related, is Aurora DAO, which is IDEX, which is the most popular decentralized exchange currently out there right now by far. If you go on DApp Radar, the most users, the most volume, they are going to be blocking orders from users within New York State IP addresses on Thursday, October 25th, so tomorrow. And we'll talk about what that means and why this is somewhat of an important discussion around decentralization as a whole. Well, first of all, we'll hop into Coinbase, and specifically the ability to offer custody services in New York. So first of all, this is, if you are in terms of speculation and just the narrative of the institutional investor herd is coming, this is big news. And Coinbase is one of has essentially received approval from New York regulators, New York Department of Financial Services, which is one of the more, I would say, difficult financial regulatory agencies, or one of the more complex financial regulatory agencies in the United States, at least. They are now able to offer custody solutions, meaning they can hold their qualified custodian to hold digital assets for their customers. And in this case, they can offer custody services for Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Ethereum, Ethereum Classic, Litecoin, and XRP. And if you are interested, if you're a Ripple fanboy, I know I bust balls on Ripple all the time and XRP, but this is, number one, it's interesting because XRP, but XRP has kind of tried to be on Coinbase before. There's always been this big push. Ripple itself apparently offered a large loan, basically an interest-free loan of $100 million, I believe, of XRP to provide liquidity to Coinbase quite a while ago, to actually have it listed on Coinbase. And so far, there have been multiple assets like Ethereum Classic, like 0x or ZRX, that have been listed on Coinbase since then, and XRP has not. But this news that Coinbase can custody specifically XRP as a qualified custodian, I think that is actually pretty big news if you're speculating on the price of XRP. It does, at least to me, indicate that there is, at the very least, a modicum of interest of either listing XRP, maybe not on Coinbase specifically, maybe it's on Coinbase Pro, maybe it's just institutional trading platforms, whatever it might be. That's interesting news from the standpoint of XRP price speculation, and the market did react positively to the news. I think XRP was up around 7 to 10%. It's settled down about 4% in the past 24 hours. But this is the type of thing, especially if you're looking at some of these assets, definitely worth keeping an eye on as you continue to look forward. But as far as this goes, just kind of going back to part of the point about losing the initial ethos of the ecosystem. Not that this is at all geared towards retail investors. This is really for large scale institutional investors who are willing to pay a premium for Coinbase to hold onto their crypto assets so that they do not have to take care of it themselves. But in many cases, crypto was supposed to be a place for individual and retail investors, or not even retail investors, but just individuals and retail users to be able to self-custody their own assets. Now, one of the bigger news pieces of the day is a large institution allowing other institutions to custody as a qualified custodian under a regulatory framework in New York. And so we'll get to the second point here too. And that's Coinbase adding its first stablecoin tied to the US dollar. Again, big news. Coinbase is kind of following, in some cases, Gemini. There's been a massive rush. There's been Gemini, Circle listed on Poloniex. You can now see, we've talked about it very much recently with Binance as well. Paxos and TUSD are now increasing in popularity on Binance. Looks like everybody is trying to take market share from Tether. Tether has obviously, undergone its fair share of FUD. Whether or not that's founded or unfounded, who knows? But specifically, Coinbase is adding USDC, which is the USDC coin, which is a fiat-backed, one-to-one backed ERC20 token from essentially the Century Center Consortium, but it's really Circle's stablecoin. And Coinbase is kind of listing as basically partners. But yes, it is a US dollar one-to-one holding ratio, meaning it's supposed to be 100% collateralized for every one USDC you have. There is $1 in a bank account somewhere. And so Coinbase has the advantages of a blockchain-based digital dollar like USDC is the easier program with, to send quickly, to use in dApps, and to store locally. It's easier than traditional bank account dollars, and that's why we think it's an important step in a more open financial system. Now, one thing here, so this is gaining a ton of steam on Twitter. It's CryptoRae. It's at CryptoRae, and he took a look at the actual contract, the Ethereum smart contract for the USDC coin, and so he says it says that USDC is an important step towards a more, in quotes, open financial system. Does this look like open finance? And you can click on it. You can see actually within the code there is an address pauser, there is an address blacklister for USDC. So essentially, Circle, if you read the terms of service around USDC, Circle can blacklist addresses, they can pause addresses. They basically have full control over USDC. So it is not a fully, let's say, decentralized stablecoin. It is not like perhaps DAI, which is not one-to-one collateralized with dollars, but DAI is not really able to go out and blacklist your address or pause your address or anything like that. So Ray brings up a fantastic point. Vitalik responds and says, the fact that such things have to be put out into lines of code that are visible to people like CryptoRae in the open, that anybody can highlight and criticize on Twitter in itself is a serious improvement over the traditional financial system. And I think we need to appreciate that more. And I do think that there are elements of truth to both what Ray is saying and to what Vitalik is saying. It is fantastic that Ray can actually go on to the smart contract and look and say, hey, there is actually a blacklist here. There's an address pauser, although you could even just go into essentially the terms of service, because I think there literally are terms of service for USDC. But the fact that it's in lines of code, in open source lines of code, and freely available for anybody to evaluate, I do think is a positive thing. But just because anybody can evaluate it doesn't necessarily mean that the thesis behind it or kind of why it is that way is correct. So to continue the theme of basically covering both sides of the story, because like I said, I think Ray had valid points. I think Vitalik has valid points as far as, number one, the fact that you can blacklist these addresses, not necessarily ideal for what people are considering this fantastic benevolent stablecoin, and then on the other side of this spectrum, the fact that you can actually go and you can see some of the issues perhaps with the open source code is a benefit. Take it over to Bully on Twitter, who is a fantastic follow. If you probably already follow him, but love Bully's legal takes. And so he says the reason you can't send CUSD, or it was actually USDC, to blacklisted addresses isn't because Coinbase hates privacy or something like that. It's to comply with the Treasury's Office of Foreign Asset Control obligations. They don't want that stablecoin being sent to a terrorist in Yemen. And then he says people on crypto Twitter often get angry at organizations complying with regulatory obligations as opposed to questioning why they exist in the first place. Just because it's a new asset class doesn't mean you get what you want all the time without any obligations or repercussions. Example, ICO mania. And then he says, if I'm counseling a company in the space, I'm a heck of a lot more worried about my clients going to federal prison than I am about a cartoon character personality on Twitter talking shit because they want to continue to avoid paying taxes. So that is let's say the more like regulatory, the pro-regulatory side of the house. And it is a fantastic point, in my opinion, because yes, Coinbase is essentially fitting technology into or choosing technology that fits into existing regulations. There is a reason that they have the blacklist ability, and there is a reason that they're able to add the stablecoin such as USDC, or maybe it would have been GUSD or whatever it might be, Paxos. There's a reason that they can add those stablecoins to platforms in the United States because they do have these features built into them. If they were freely available or freely flexible to do whatever you wanted to do, then probably not. And that was a conversation that a few folks had in a Telegram group I was in, where, why did Coinbase choose to add USDC and not DAI? Well, number one, I think that USDC is one-to-one fiat-backed, dollar per dollar, essentially crypto asset. So in that case, with USDC versus DAI is an over collateralized with Ethereum. But what happens if Ethereum goes to zero? What happens if Ethereum goes crazy and the price really fluctuates after it's already come down 80-85%? What's going to happen then? Is Coinbase on the hook when they're advertising DAI as a stable coin when maybe it necessarily isn't? And then also to the point, what happens if somebody goes on Coinbase, buys DAI, and then sends that to an illicit actor? Because if you listen to the congressional testimonies anytime, the Senate hearings, whatever it might be, one of the big things that always comes up is what happens if a terrorist uses this? What happens if a terrorist uses this? And if Coinbase is the one that facilitates that usage, that's a problem. However, if they're using USDC, maybe it's a lot easier to stop that and to figure that out, stop that in its tracks. So one thing to consider. And then from the point of shout out to Eric Meltzer, Proof of Work. This is a fantastic cryptocurrency newsletter. If you do not subscribe, I highly recommend you do so. I will include a link to this specific edition of the newsletter, and there is a little button for you to subscribe. But he talks a little bit, and he talked a little bit previously in one of the other one of the other newsletters about his thoughts. But just summarizing again, I think it's really solid. And he says, I think it's a mistake to think about USD or any of these other asset-backed crypto or asset-backed coins as quote-unquote crypto or cryptocurrency. And the fact that Coinbase's announcement of the USDC project makes it worth revisiting. And he basically says, USD-backed coins are a great complement to cryptocurrency, but they're themselves not real cryptocurrency. And in fact, they're really a lot closer to a centralized payment system like PayPal. So, there's really a centralized element to these. Obviously, with USDC, there are the blacklists. There is the ability to pause addresses, much like PayPal can basically blacklist you, can pause your account, can freeze your account, can do whatever they want. Much is the same with USDC, GUSD, Paxos, basically all of these regulated fiat-backed stablecoins. And the reason that they are able to be regulated, and the reason that PayPal as well is able to be regulated and is able to function kind of within the government framework, is because they have those types of things in there. So when you're looking at that as a crypto landscape, it is somewhat antithetical to the point of what cryptocurrency was originally supposed to be, or Bitcoin specifically was originally supposed to be, is that, peer-to-peer electronic cash, where you're able to send that to anybody in the world without any restrictions, without anybody specifically being able to censor your transactions or do anything like that. In the case of many of these new stablecoins, yes, people can censor your transactions. Yes, you are able to have certain accounts and assets frozen if the centralized party essentially managing this contract does not like what you are doing. And I do think that, like Eric said, and getting to the point of, there are bad things, there are good things. It is a complement to crypto, or to crypto assets, to cryptocurrency. But calling some of these stable coins true crypto is somewhat of a misnomer in general, and something that you have to kind of think about and wrap your head around a little bit more. And it does go to show in many cases that while I think that the industry as a whole, and we'll get into it with Aurora IDEX, but I think the industry as a whole, is kind of going from this whole cypherpunk movement to, okay, we tried that, or we're trying that, but we also don't want to, as Bully said, go to federal prison. So we're going to do what we have to do to maybe stay out of that and function within the existing framework. Now, we'll pop over here to Twitter. So this is a notice. Again, this is from Aurora DAO, which is the company behind IDEX, which many of you, I'm sure, have used. It is one of the most popular. Actually, it is the most popular decentralized exchange, and I will get to a decentralized exchange in a second here. But it is the most popular quote-unquote decentralized exchange. But they say, notice IDEX will begin blocking new orders from users with New York State IP addresses on Thursday, October 25th, 6 p.m. UTC. Cancels and withdrawals will remain active. And they got Aurora DAO, IDEX got absolutely shredded for doing this. And part of the reason, and I certainly understand it, is, if we pop over here, actually, Crypto.alt literally highlights it. In their Twitter profile, it says, decentralized crypto banking and home of IDEX, the first real-time decentralized exchange. So let's talk about this for a second. So decentralized exchanges. I am somewhat familiar with decentralized exchanges. I have a good amount of familiarity with them. And when it comes to decentralized exchanges, it was a hot name. It was a hot topic in 2017, early 2018. And with that, the term decentralized exchange kind of came out. But I think, just off the top, and this is a preface to the conversation, I do think that, like, decentralized exchanges and decentralized exchange, for the most part, somewhat needs to be renamed, because most of the quote-unquote decentralized exchanges are not truly decentralized exchanges, where it's just, anybody can do it in anything that they want, and it's free flowing and yada yada yada. Most of them are exchanges that have some element of centralization, but they are non-custodial, meaning the exchanges do not hold your assets. And I think that is honestly a better term. It's not a sexy term at all, but a non-custodial exchange is a much better term than a decentralized or a centralized exchange, because IDEX does not hold your funds. They might hold your funds in a smart contract, but IDEX does not necessarily hold your funds. Like, many of the 0x relayers are non-custodial exchanges, but have very centralized elements. AirSwap is non-custodial. It never holds your tokens in a centralized party. So with that being said, anytime you have something like this, IDEX, specifically Aurora DAO, they're blocking New York because they're worried about New York regulation, essentially, and they don't want to not comply with laws. And the thing about decentralized exchanges is, for the most part, if there's a CEO of a company, somebody can get sued, somebody can go to jail, and they are making sure that their business continues to function into the future. So I do think that, when it comes down to this, many of the quote-unquote decentralized exchanges, there are elements of centralization across the board for much of them. And it's kind of, at this point in time, it's a nomenclature thing, it's a naming thing. But the most decentralized exchange, at least in my opinion, back in the day, was Ether Delta. nobody really knew the company behind EtherDelta. Nobody really knew the person who was running behind it. There was no CEO. There was no, there was not a lot of public facing, and anybody could add a token to it. It was kind of flying under the radar. It was kind of doing whatever it wanted to, and IDEX was, functioned somewhat in a similar manner after EtherDelta got hacked and was sold, and then Fork Delta came up. But I do think that when it comes down to this, you have to look at it, and everybody has this dream utopia of this incredible decentralization of, doing whatever you want to do, and, being able to freely transact any ERC20 tokens or any tokens, whatever it might be. But when it comes down to it, somebody's hosting the website, somebody's paying for the servers, somebody's behind it. And if it turns out that what's happening on that platform or what's happening on that site is not complying with laws, perhaps in a state like New York, perhaps in a country, perhaps globally, whatever it might be, there's probably somebody to go after. And in that case, there is an element of centralization. So calling something a decentralized exchange is tough. But I do think IDEX is in a tough scenario. I do think that, the term decentralized exchange at this point in time really should just kind of be like a non-custodial exchange, because they're not holding assets. They're not holding assets for their customers. You're just popping in MetaMask or Ledger, Treasure, whatever, whatever hardware wallet or paper wallet you might be using. So that's kind of my overall thoughts on that specific, function of the market. And you can see here on the block, they said IDEX, and then in quotes or in parentheses, decentralized exchange will start blocking New York. And this is similar to, this is similar in a lot of respects to just kind of what's happening throughout the industry. We've talked about Shapeshift, what happened in the past with Shapeshift, where Shapeshift, number one, they've been blocking New York IP addresses forever. And to the point as well, I mean, I'm not advising this, but if they're simply blocking IP addresses, it's not very hard for, there's no KYC. It's not very hard for an individual to simply VPN to another address on IDEX. It's not very difficult at all. That's not exactly the most stringent of requirements to get around. But nonetheless, it brings up the point of a decentralized exchange, or centralized versus decentralized. So wanted to talk a little bit about that. But hopefully this video today was halfway interesting to you. I'd love to get your thoughts, or if you're on the podcast, would shoot me a tweet, crypto_Bobby on Twitter. But would love to hear just your general thoughts on where the industry is going as a whole. Are we losing the original ethos of cryptocurrency? Is this something where at this point in time we're just basically delving back into the original system and kind of wrapping it just with this new technology, whether it's ERC20 tokens or whatever it might be, but still giving the same people the same control? Or is this a necessary step on an evolution towards a more quote unquote open or decentralized future? Would love to hear your thoughts in the YouTube comments and on Twitter as well. Thank you so much for your time. Like I said before, I'll be going live tonight, October 24th at 8 p.m. for another episode of Crypto Happy Hour. We'll try and pick out something to drink. It's been a while since I've crushed some booze on Crypto Happy Hour. So stay tuned for that. If you enjoyed this video, hit that thumbs up button, hit the like button. Really appreciate the time. Crypto Bobby signing out. Peace.